So in the confessional, and you will be in the confessional. You do a lot more counseling than we used to do in the olden days. Yeah. To the sick and those about to die, the pastor comes carrying with him the great physician, and often to act as the usher into heaven. When I was a boy, when you go to a movie, they used to have ushers in the theater. It was dark, and I guess they don't anymore. I haven't been to a movie in 20, 30 years at least. But in the olden days, it was dark in there, and when you go in there from the light, you couldn't see where you were going, and so they had these ushers in these fitted uniforms with this little itty bitty flashlight, and then the usher would shine that light down the floor so that you could, and point it into the aisle until you found a place where you could sit without tripping over a bunch of people because you couldn't see in the dark. Well, that's what you often will be to the sick and to the dying. When you go to the, I will take the dying first. I'll back up to the sick. When you go to serve the dying, I remember when I was your age, I thought, boy, that's got to be tough, ministering to the dying. It's one of the great joys of the ministry. My favorite way to start out when the person knew they were dying was with the question of, well, are you ready to go see Jesus? And it was amazing how often the person who was dying would just all of a sudden it was like the dam broke. And you gave by that question, you gave them the license to tell you things that they had on their mind for years. I can't tell you how many dying people I'm sure I knew better than their spouse did when they died. Because of the stuff that came out when they were on their way to see Jesus and afraid. You get to be pastor.
So of course I did. And she chased the nieces away and she was sobbing. Uncontrollable. Pastor, I don't know if I can tell you. It's so terrible. What's a 90-year-old little old lady going to tell you that could be all that bad? I don't know. I said, just tell me. You're not going to say anything I haven't heard before. Just tell me what's the matter. Ready for this? Pastor, when I go to bed at night, I fall asleep before I finish my prayers. Oh! That was it. How can God ever forgive me? Racked with guilt, afraid to die, because she falls asleep without finishing her prayers. What did I say to her? What do you think I said to her? What better way to fall asleep than that your last thought should be of Jesus? She was satisfied.
You're the pastor. You're the ambassador of Christ. You're Christ to that individual. And it's a great honor. As I say, especially in the case of the sick and the case of the dying, the honor is very different. But I remember one little old lady, sweetest thing. And I went to see her when she was in the hospital, and she was very old. She was up in the 90s. And you go into the room, and she was sleeping. Well, you never quite know what to do when they're sleeping. On the one hand, you don't maybe have time to come back. And on the other hand, if they really need that particular amount of sleep, you don't want to wake them up. And so you kind of stand there and try to sort it out and figure out what you're going to do. And I was standing at the end of her bed trying to figure out whether I should wake her up or not. And she suddenly woke up and she saw me and she went, "Ah!" And I said, "What's the matter?" And she said, "I thought you were Jesus and I had died and gone to heaven." Well, close enough.
And there are still moments, maybe we don't want to admit it, but there are still moments when we kind of shudder at our own impending death. I don't know about you, but every now and again, and not so much anymore, I used to wake up in the middle of the night and feel an icy chill, and the sound in my ear that said, "And you too must die." So because we live in this house of clay with our sinful flesh, there's still a bit of, I'm not so sure what happens on the other side. But to the extent that the kingdom of God has come in power, death tastes sweet. And you see that, don't you, when you're being the usher to people on their way into heaven, when you minister to them on their deathbeds. I used to say to them, that was always when somebody, when I knew that they knew they were dying, when I would have my devotion with them, I would say, "Are you ready to go see Jesus?" And then it would come out. Either that they weren't at all ready to go see Jesus, and you got to prepare them, or, "Yes, Pastor, I'm ready to go see Jesus." He has with suffering cut the cords that bind me to this world. And I anticipate the taste of death as something sweet. Because there's always something that you didn't see before. I don't care what it is you're reading. Even as you age, you look at certain parts of the Bible differently than you were young. I remember one time when I was reading about, in the Old Testament, all the provisions that David made for the building of the temple. And it occurred to me, I started thinking about that. Was David, I don't know if he was or not, but the question came to mind, was David trying to preserve orthodoxy from the grave? He was going to have it all perfect when he died, so that all Solomon had to do was step into it, and the golden age of the true worship of the true God in the true temple would begin. Did he think about that? Did that thought cross his mind? I don't know. So much of preaching and teaching, trying to save the church for tomorrow, teach future pastors, and you hope when you're dead they'll be orthodox, and you will preserve the faith of the church from the grave because you learned them good. You taught them to love Jesus and his word and his people, and so now the church is all set. And then you get old and you find out that the problems that you're going to face are not the same as the problems that I faced. I was well trained for the problems that I faced. Hopefully you've been well trained for the problems you're going to face, but you're going to have to face them. The orthodoxy of the church, St. Jude said it all. Earnestly contend for the faith which was once delivered to the saints. It's a never done deal. And each generation has to win that orthodoxy for itself. And it does it by fidelity and love for the scriptures, and not apart from it. Other things you read, I remember, and it keeps changing because, like I say, your Zitzim Laban keeps changing. I remember one time after I had retired, when I was reading the account of David's provisioning for the building of Solomon's temple, how he collected all this and he did all that, and everything was going to be wonderful. I thought to myself, which I would never have thought when I was active, the thought occurred to me, how much of your time and energy is devoted to the thought that you're going to save the orthodoxy of the church for the next generation? No, you're not. You do what you can where you are when you're there. And it's going to be up to those that you taught, those to whom you preached, to their children, to live through the tests that God will send them unique to their time, just as it was for us. Yeah. So, was it an easy life? No, it was not an easy life. Was it worthwhile? Oh boy, was it ever. Would I trade in anything that was difficult for something that was easier? Absolutely not. It just was an enormous blessing. And, well, if you go on and become pastors for the right reason and you're faithful and you have a tough time of it, good, thank God. And when it's all said and done, I'm sure you won't regret it. I know I sure don't.
If you were, well, this is what's on my mind, so I'll go with that. If you were preaching on this text, whether just no, I got to do one other thing first. I'm sorry, I'm an old man, and I don't get it all together sometimes.